The first thing I remember is the sound. Not voices, not crying, just the sharp, uneven beeping of a heart monitor cutting through the air. I was standing in the emergency room, staring at a set of double doors with a red sign that read authorized personnel only, when a nurse turned toward me and said something that didn't feel real. "If you don't sign the consent form soon," she said, calm but firm, "we're going to lose her." For a moment, I didn't respond. My hands were shaking, but my face felt strangely numb, like my body and my mind had decided to stop talking to each other. I looked past the nurse, through the glass, and saw her lying there. Tubes everywhere. Pale, unrecognizable, my sister. The same sister who hadn't spoken my name in 5 years. The same sister whose words had once destroyed my life. Behind me, my parents were crying. My mother was pressed against the wall, whispering prayers under her breath, while my father sat slumped in a chair, his face buried in his hands. They looked smaller than I remembered, older, broken. No one spoke to me directly at first. It was like they didn't know what to say, or maybe they weren't sure they were allowed to speak to me at all. After all, the last time we'd seen each other, they'd told me not to come back. I stared at the consent form in my hands. My name was already printed on it. Full legal name. Relationship, sibling, the irony burned. 5 years ago, I wasn't family enough to be believed. Tonight, I was family enough to save her life. The nurse cleared her throat. "We need an answer." And just like that, the past came rushing back, not all at once. Not like a movie montage, but in fragments, moments, feelings. Growing up, people always said we were a good family. That's what it looked like from the outside. 2 parents, 2 kids, a stable home, no obvious drama. But inside that house, things were uneven, quietly uneven. My sister had always been the fragile one, the emotional one. The one my parents worried about. If she cried, everything stopped. If she was upset, it became the center of the house. I learned early that my role was different. I was the one who was supposed to understand, to adjust, to let things go. "She's sensitive," my mother would say. "Be the bigger person," my father would add. And I always was. I protected her at school. Covered for her when she messed up. Took responsibility even when something wasn't my fault, because it was easier than watching my parents stress. I thought that was what love looked like. I thought loyalty worked both ways. I was wrong. Standing there in the ER, I realized something terrifying. This wasn't the first time my family's fate had rested on my silence or my sacrifice. It was just the first time it was happening under fluorescent lights, with doctors waiting and a clock ticking somewhere I couldn't see. My mother finally looked up at me. Our eyes met for a second, and in that second I saw fear. Not anger, not judgment. Fear. "Please," she whispered. "We need you." She didn't say my name. She didn't apologize. She didn't explain. She just needed something from me again. The doctor approached next, flipping through a chart. "You're the only compatible match we've found so far," he said. "We've tried calling other relatives. No one else is available in time." Of course they were. 5 years ago, when I was packing my things into a bag because my parents believed a lie, no one had called me either. No one had asked where I would go. No one had wondered if I would be okay. But now they needed me. I looked at my sister again through the glass, machines breathing for her, her chest rising and falling in a rhythm she couldn't control. For the first time since I walked into that hospital, I felt something sharp cut through the numbness. Not anger, not hatred, but a question that wouldn't leave me alone. Why was it always me? Why was I only remembered when something was broken? The nurse shifted her weight, checking her watch. The doctor waited. My parents watched me like strangers hoping for mercy. And as I stood there, pen hovering over the paper, I knew that whatever I chose next would change everything. Not just for them. For me, because this wasn't just about saving a life. It was about deciding whether the past still owned me. As I stood there holding that pen, my mind drifted back to the version of us that existed before everything fell apart. Not because I missed it, but because I needed to understand how we had reached this point. How a family that once sat at the same dinner table every night could end up staring at each other like strangers in a hospital hallway. Growing up, my parents never said they favored my sister. They didn't have to. It was something you felt in the small moments. If she forgot her homework, the teacher was too strict. If I forgot mine, it was a lecture about responsibility. If she raised her voice, she was overwhelmed. If I did, I was disrespectful. I learned early that being calm, quiet, and dependable earned approval, but not protection. My sister and I shared a room for years. At night, she would talk about her fears, her dreams, her frustrations. I listened. I always listened. When she cried, I comforted her. When she got into trouble, I covered for her. I believed that being there for her meant she would be there for me too if I ever needed it. but I never did need it, or at least I never asked. By the time we were older, the roles were set in stone. She was the one who needed understanding. I was the one who was expected to handle things. My parents trusted me with tasks, chores, responsibilities, but when it came to emotions, doubts, or truth, they trusted her. That imbalance stayed invisible until the day it mattered most. The incident itself didn't feel life-changing at first. It was ordinary. The kind of situation families deal with all the time. Something went wrong, something that would have been uncomfortable, embarrassing, maybe even serious, but fixable. Instead, it became a weapon. I still remember the way my sister looked that day. Not angry, not scared, just desperate. She knew she was in trouble and she knew exactly how to get out of it. She lied, not loudly, not dramatically. She didn't point or scream. She cried. She spoke softly. She said just enough. And my parents believed her. When they confronted me, I was confused more than anything else. I laughed at first, thinking it was a misunderstanding that would clear itself up in minutes. I tried to explain. I tried to reason. I expected questions, evidence, doubt. None of that came. They looked at me like they were seeing someone new, someone they didn't recognize. "We're disappointed," my father said. "I never thought you'd do something like this," my mother added. I kept waiting for them to ask my sister to leave the room, to ask her what really happened, to give me the same benefit of the doubt they'd given her my entire life. They didn't. My sister sat there quietly, tears sliding down her face, not looking at me. She didn't need to say anything else. The story had already been written. That was the moment something inside me cracked, not loudly but deeply. I realized that the truth wasn't what mattered in that house. What mattered was peace, comfort, the easiest explanation, and I was the easiest one to blame. When they told me to leave, it didn't happen in a burst of anger. There was no shouting, no dramatic argument. It was worse than that. It was calm, final. They gave me time to pack. They told me I needed to think about what I'd done. They said space would be good for everyone. No one said goodbye. I remember standing at the door with my bag, waiting for my sister to look up. She didn't, not once. She just sat there, silent, letting the lie do its work. That night, everything I believed about family collapsed. The first few weeks after that were survival mode. I stayed where I could. I worked whatever jobs I could get. I stopped checking my phone because every time it buzzed, a part of me hoped it would be them, and every time it wasn't, it hurt more than I expected. Eventually, the hope faded. Years passed, 5 of them. I rebuilt my life slowly, quietly. I learned how to be alone without falling apart. I learned how to trust myself when no one else did. And I made peace with the idea that some doors, once closed, stay that way. Until tonight. Until a nurse handed me a pen and asked me to decide whether the person who destroyed my life deserved to be saved by me. The weight of that choice pressed down on my chest as I looked through the glass again. My sister lay there unconscious, unaware of the truth waiting just outside the room. Unaware that the lie she told years ago had finally come back to her, wearing a hospital bracelet, counting seconds. And I wondered if she remembered me at all. The pen felt heavier the longer I held it, like it was pulling me backward instead of forward. My parents were still behind me, still waiting, still afraid. I could feel their eyes on my back, but I didn't turn around. I wasn't ready to look at them again, not yet. Because once I did, I knew I wouldn't just see who they were now. I'd see who they had been that night. The night they decided my sister's tears mattered more than my words. I remembered how quiet the house had been after they told me to leave. Not angry quiet, not tense, just empty. The kind of quiet that tells you the decision has already been made and nothing you say will change it. I remember walking into my room, pulling a bag from under the bed and standing there for a long time trying to decide what parts of my life were worth taking with me. It's strange what you choose in moments like that. Not the important things, not the expensive things. You grab what feels familiar. Clothes that smell like home. Old photos. A book you've already read 100 times. I remember thinking they'd stop me. That at the last second, one of them would come to the door and say, "Wait, let's talk." Or that my sister would finally look at me and tell the truth. Neither happened. And that silence followed me for years. In the hospital hallway, I finally turned around. My parents were sitting side by side now, closer than before, like they were holding each other up. My mother's eyes were red and swollen. My father looked like he'd aged a decade in a single night. For a moment, I wondered if they were remembering it too. If the weight they felt now was even close to the weight they'd placed on me back then. My father stood up slowly. "We didn't know who else to call," he said, his voice low, careful, like he was afraid of saying the wrong thing. I almost laughed. 5 years ago, they hadn't called me at all. "You didn't call me then either," I said. My voice surprised me. It didn't shake. It didn't rise. It was steady in a way I hadn't expected. My mother flinched. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Whatever excuse she'd been about to offer died before it reached the air. The doctor cleared his throat. "We don't have much time," he said gently but firmly. "This isn't about the past. This is about whether she survives the night." That's how it always is, I thought. The past only matters when it's convenient. I looked back through the glass. My sister's face was pale, her lips slightly parted, her chest rising and falling with the help of machines. She looked smaller than I remembered, vulnerable, nothing like the person who had sat silently while my life fell apart. And despite everything, a part of me still recognized her, still remembered late-night conversations, shared jokes, inside secrets. The version of us that existed before fear made her choose herself at my expense. That was the part that hurt the most. I wasn't standing there deciding whether to save a stranger. I was deciding whether to save someone who had known exactly what she was doing when she lied. The nurse took a step closer. "We need your answer," she said again, softer this time. I closed my eyes. For years, I'd imagined this moment, not this exact situation, but something like it. A moment where they'd need me, where I'd finally have the power they once held over me. And in those imagined versions, I always knew what I'd do. I'd walk away. I'd let them feel what I felt. I'd protect myself for once. But standing there with the smell of antiseptic in the air and machines counting seconds behind a glass wall, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like another test. Another moment where my choice would define who I was. I opened my eyes and looked at my parents again. "If I do this," I said slowly, "it doesn't erase what happened." My father nodded immediately, too quickly. "We know," he said. "We're not asking for that." I didn't believe him, not fully, but I wasn't talking to them anyway. I was talking to myself, because deep down I knew this wasn't about forgiveness. It wasn't even about family. It was about whether I wanted the lie that destroyed me to keep shaping my future too. I looked down at the paper. The line for my signature was blank, waiting. Somewhere inside that room, my sister's life was hanging on what I did next. And whether she lived or died, the truth she'd buried years ago was about to surface, one way or another. I took a slow breath, and I picked up the pen. The pen touched the paper, and in that moment everything felt strangely quiet. Not peaceful, just still, like the world was holding its breath. I signed my name slowly, deliberately, as if the weight of every letter mattered. When I handed the form back to the nurse, she nodded once and rushed away without another word. It was done. At least the first part was. My parents didn't speak right away. They just stared at me like they weren't sure whether to thank me or apologize, or whether either would even be appropriate. I didn't wait for them to decide. I turned back toward the glass and watched as doctors and nurses moved around my sister, preparing her for what came next. Seeing her like that stirred something complicated inside me. Not sympathy exactly, not anger either. It was closer to grief, for what we had been, and for what we could never be again. 5 years had changed me in ways she would never fully understand. 5 years of being cut off teaches you how to build walls without even realizing you're doing it. Time passed in fragments after that. Minutes blurred together. I sat alone in a corner of the waiting area while my parents whispered to each other nearby. I could hear my mother crying softly. My father kept rubbing his hands together over and over like he was trying to scrub something invisible off his skin. At one point, my mother stood up and walked toward me. She stopped a few feet away, hesitant, like she was afraid I might disappear if she got too close. "I didn't think you'd come," she said quietly. I didn't answer, because the truth was, neither had I. She swallowed. "When they called, when they said it was serious, you were the only name we could give." There it was again. Not an apology. Not an admission, just need. I looked up at her then, really looked at her. Her hair was streaked with gray now. The lines on her face were deeper. She looked tired in a way that went beyond this one night. "You had my number the whole time," I said, not accusing, just stating a fact. Her eyes filled with tears again. We thought you didn't want to hear from us." That almost made me laugh. Almost. Before I could respond, a doctor stepped into the waiting area. His expression was serious but controlled, the way doctors learn to be when delivering news that could go either way. "We're taking her in now," he said. "The procedure will take some time. We'll update you as soon as we know more." My parents stood up immediately, clinging to each other. I stayed seated. I didn't know where I belonged in this moment, whether I was part of this family again, or just a resource they'd used in an emergency. As they wheeled my sister past us, her eyes fluttered open for a second. Just a second, and in that second she saw me. Her gaze locked onto mine. Confusion flickered across her face, followed by something else. Recognition, fear, maybe even shame. Her lips parted like she wanted to say something, but then the doors closed and she was gone. That look stayed with me. Hours passed. The waiting room grew quieter. Night deepened outside the hospital windows. At some point, my parents fell asleep in their chairs, exhaustion finally overtaking them. I stayed awake, staring at the floor, replaying memories I'd tried hard to forget. I thought about the night I left, about how I'd walked away without looking back because I was afraid that if I did, I wouldn't be able to leave at all. About how I'd promised myself I'd never put my life in their hands again. And yet here I was. Sometime near dawn, a nurse approached me. "She's out of surgery," she said. "She's stable for now." Relief washed over the room. My parents woke instantly, clinging to each other again, thanking anyone who would listen. I felt relief too, but it was muted. Careful, like I didn't trust it to last. "She's asking to see you," the nurse added, looking directly at me. My parents froze. I stood up slowly. This was the moment I'd been bracing for, even more than the decision to sign the form. This was the moment where there would be no machines to hide behind, no paperwork to focus on. Just the two of us and the truth that had been waiting 5 years to be spoken. The room was dim when I walked in. My sister lay propped up against pillows, her face still pale but her eyes alert now. They widened when she saw me. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then she started to cry. "I didn't think you'd come," she whispered, her voice weak but unmistakable. I stepped closer, stopping just short of her bed. "You didn't think about me at all," I said quietly. Her tears fell harder. Looked away, unable to meet my eyes. "I was scared," she said, "and I made a choice I can't take back." The room felt heavy with everything she wasn't saying, with every word she owed me. I crossed my arms, steadying myself. "You're alive," I said. "Now you get to tell the truth." She nodded slowly, trembling. "I lied," she said. "I lied because it was easier than facing what I'd done, and I let them blame you." Outside the room, I heard a sharp intake of breath. My parents had heard every word. The silence that followed was louder than anything I'd ever experienced. And I knew, standing there, that no matter what happened next, nothing would ever be the same again. My parents stepped into the room slowly, like they were afraid the truth might break if they moved too fast. My mother's face had gone completely pale. My father looked like he'd been punched in the chest and forgotten how to breathe. What did you say?" my mother asked, her voice barely holding together. My sister squeezed her eyes shut, tears streaming down her temples into her hair. "I lied," she said again, louder this time, like she was forcing herself to say it clearly. "It was my fault, all of it, and I let you believe it was them." The word "them" hung in the air between us, heavy and uncomfortable. For 5 years, my parents had spoken about me as if I were a mistake they didn't want to name. And now, suddenly, I was standing right there, real and unavoidable. My father took a step back and sat down hard in the chair by the wall. He ran a hand through his hair, shaking his head over and over. "No, that doesn't make sense," he muttered. "You were so sure, you were crying, you said—" "I was scared," my sister interrupted. Her voice cracked, but she didn't stop. "And I knew you'd protect me, I knew you'd believe me." That was the part that hurt the most, not the lie itself, but how confident she had been that it would work. My mother turned toward me slowly. Her eyes finally met mine, and this time there was no authority in them, no certainty, just raw regret. "Why didn't you tell us?" she asked, almost pleading. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "I did," I said. "You just didn't listen." Silence filled the room again, thick and suffocating. My parents had no answer for that because there wasn't one. The doctor knocked lightly and stepped inside, breaking the moment. "She needs rest," he said gently. "Emotional stress isn't good for her right now." My sister nodded weakly. "I'm sorry," she whispered to me as they adjusted her IV. "I know it doesn't fix anything, but I'm sorry." I didn't say it's okay because it was. I left the room without another word. In the hallway, my parents followed me. My mother reached out, then stopped herself, her hand hovering in the air like she wasn't sure she still had the right to touch me. "We were wrong," my father said finally. His voice was hoarse. "We were so wrong." I leaned against the wall, exhaustion crashing into me all at once. "You didn't just make a mistake," I said. "You chose who to believe, and you chose wrong." My mother started crying again, openly this time. "We thought we were protecting our family." "You protected what was convenient," I replied, not harshly, just honestly. They didn't argue. We stood there for a long time, not really talking. There was nothing left to explain. The truth had done its job. It had stripped everything down to what it really was. Eventually, my father spoke again. "What happens now?" he asked. I looked at the floor, then back at them. "That depends," I said, "on whether you're asking because you're afraid of losing her or because you're afraid of losing me." Neither of them answered right away. That told me everything. I stayed at the hospital until morning, not because I felt obligated, but because I needed closure. I watched the sky lighten through the windows, the night finally giving way to day. It felt symbolic in a way that almost made me uncomfortable. Before I left, I went back into my sister's room one last time. She was asleep now, her breathing steady, her face calmer than it had been in years. She looked peaceful in a way I'd never seen before, like the lie had finally stopped running her life. I stood there quietly, then turned and walked out. At the exit, my parents were waiting. My mother stepped forward. "Can we see you again?" she asked softly. "Can we try to fix this?" I thought about the nights I'd spent wondering what I'd done wrong, about the years it took to stop blaming myself, about how hard it was to rebuild a sense of worth when the people who were supposed to protect you are the ones who take it away. "I don't know," I said truthfully. "Fixing something takes time and trust, and you don't get to rush that just because the truth finally came out." My father nodded slowly, tears in his eyes. "We'll wait," he said, "however long it takes." I didn't promise anything. I just walked out into the morning air, feeling lighter than I had in years, not because everything was healed, but because for the first time the story was finally mine again. The lie was over, and whatever came next would be built on truth or not at all. The air outside the hospital was cold and sharp, the kind that wakes you up whether you want it to or not. I stood there for a moment, hands in my pockets, watching people come and go like nothing extraordinary had just happened inside those walls. For them, it was just another morning. For me, it felt like the end of one life and the uncomfortable beginning of another. I didn't go home right away. I didn't even know what home meant anymore. Instead, I sat in my car and let the quiet settle in. My phone buzzed once, then again. A message from my mother. "Please let us know you got home safely." I stared at the screen for a long time before locking my phone and setting it face down on the seat. Not because I was angry, but because I needed space to breathe without being pulled back into roles I hadn't agreed to play again. Over the next few days, I kept my distance. I went back to my routine: work, groceries, sleep. On the outside, nothing had changed, but inside, something had shifted. The truth was out now, not just spoken, but heard, and that changed the weight I carried. Calls started slowly. One from my father asking how I was. One from my mother apologizing again, this time without excuses. They didn't ask for forgiveness outright. They didn't demand anything. That surprised me more than the apologies themselves. My sister sent a message too. "I don't expect you to reply. I just need you to know I think about what I did every day." I didn't answer. Not because I wanted to punish her, but because I didn't yet know what answering would mean. Weeks passed. Then one afternoon, I got another call from the hospital. Routine follow-up, they said. My sister was recovering well, but there was something in the nurse's tone that made me pause. "She's been asking about you," she added gently. "A lot." I drove to the hospital without fully deciding why. Maybe curiosity, maybe closure, maybe because a part of me wanted to see if things really were different now. She looked better than the last time I'd seen her. Still fragile, but present, more grounded. When she saw me walk in, her eyes filled with tears immediately, but this time she didn't cry. She just looked tired. "I don't deserve you being here," she said. "No," I replied. "You don't." She nodded, accepting it without argument. That was new. "I've been thinking about that night," she said quietly. "About how easy it was to let you take the fall. I told myself you'd be fine. You were always fine." I leaned against the wall. That's the lie people tell themselves when they don't want to feel guilty. She looked down. "I know." There was a long pause, then she said something I didn't expect. "I don't want things to go back to how they were." I raised an eyebrow. "Neither do I. That version of our family only worked because you carried everything," she continued. "And I don't want to be that person anymore." I studied her face, searching for manipulation, excuses, anything familiar. I didn't find it. What I saw instead was someone finally sitting with the consequences of their choices. "I can't undo what I did," she said, "but I won't pretend it didn't happen either." That mattered, not enough to fix everything, but enough to change how the room felt. Before I left, she said, "If you never want a relationship with me again, I'll understand, but if you ever do, I'll do it on your terms." For the first time in years, I believed her. When I met my parents afterward, it was different too. There was no expectation, no pressure, just awkward honesty. They listened more than they spoke, and when they spoke, they owned their mistakes without trying to soften them. It didn't heal me, but it stopped the bleeding. That night, alone again, I realized something important. Forgiveness wasn't a single decision. It was a process. One that didn't erase boundaries, it required them. I wasn't rebuilding the past. I was deciding what kind of future I was willing to allow. And for the first time since everything fell apart, that choice was completely mine. The weeks that followed were quiet in a way I wasn't used to. Not the heavy silence of being cut off, but a softer one, filled with unanswered questions and slow, careful decisions. My parents didn't push. My sister didn't demand anything. That restraint mattered more than any apology ever could. Still, healing wasn't automatic. Some days I woke up feeling lighter, like a knot I'd carried for years had finally loosened. Other days, the anger came back without warning. A memory. A phrase. A tone of voice. Trauma doesn't leave all at once, it checks in when you least expect it. One evening, my father asked if we could talk, just the two of us. No family dinner, no emotional ambush, just a conversation. I agreed cautiously. We sat at a small cafe, neutral ground. He looked nervous, tapping his fingers against the table, waiting for me to start. "I keep thinking about that night," he said finally. "About how certain I was and how wrong I was." I didn't interrupt. "I always thought being a good parent meant making quick decisions," he continued. "Keeping order, protecting the family." "And you did," I said, "just not everyone." He nodded slowly, swallowing hard. "I didn't realize that choosing the easy story meant losing you." That sentence landed differently than the others, because for the first time he wasn't talking about guilt. He was talking about consequence. "I don't know if I deserve a place in your life," he said. "But I want you to know I see what I did now, and I'm sorry." I believed him. That didn't mean I trusted him yet, but it meant I could stop questioning whether I'd imagined everything. My relationship with my sister remained fragile. We spoke occasionally, carefully, no pretending, no rewriting history. When the past came up, she didn't deflect or minimize, she owned it, every time. One day, she said something that stayed with me. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said. "But I hope one day you won't feel like you lost 5 years because of me." I thought about that for a long time after the call ended, because the truth was I hadn't just lost years. I'd gained something too. I'd learned how to stand alone, how to build a life without approval, how to trust my own version of events even when no one else did. Those were lessons I wouldn't wish on anyone, but they were mine now. The past couldn't be undone, but it didn't have to define everything that came after it. Months later, I attended a small family gathering. Not a reunion, not a celebration, just coffee. Neutral, simple, there were awkward moments. Long pauses, unspoken memories, but there was also effort, listening, respect, and boundaries I didn't move back in. I didn't slip into old roles. I spoke up when something felt wrong. And when I needed space, I took it without apology. That was the real change. Not that they said sorry, but that I no longer disappeared to keep the peace. As I left that day, my sister hugged me briefly. Not tightly, not desperately, just enough to say I'm here if you want me to be. For the first time, it didn't feel like a trap. Driving home, I realized something that surprised me. I wasn't carrying the lie anymore. It didn't belong to me. It never had. And whether or not my family stayed in my life long term, I knew this much for sure. I had survived being cut off. I had survived being blamed. And I had survived choosing compassion without sacrificing myself. That wasn't weakness. That was strength. Time has a strange way of softening things without erasing them. Months turned into a year, and the chaos of that night in the ER slowly settled into something quieter, something I could live with. Not everything was fixed. Not everything needed to be. I stayed in touch with my parents, but on my terms. Short calls. Occasional visits. No pretending that 5 lost years could be recovered with a few apologies. They respected that, or at least they tried. And effort, I learned, counts for something. My sister continued her recovery, not just physically, but emotionally. She went to therapy. She stopped making excuses. When people asked about our relationship, she didn't hide behind half-truths anymore. She told them the truth, even when it made her look bad. That mattered more than she probably realized. One afternoon, long after the hospital smell and the beeping machines had faded from my memory, I found myself thinking back to that first moment in the ER. The nurse, the form, the pen hovering over the page. I realized something then that I hadn't been able to put into words before. That night wasn't about saving my sister. It was about saving myself. For years, I had carried the weight of being misunderstood, of being blamed, of being erased from my own family's story. I thought healing would come from being believed someday, from hearing someone finally say, "You were right." But healing didn't come from that. It came from choosing who I wanted to be when the power shifted. I could have walked away that night. No one would have blamed me. I would have been justified. But I would have carried that choice with me forever, just like I'd carried their betrayal. Instead, I chose something harder. I chose not to let their worst decision define my character. That choice didn't make me a hero. It didn't make me noble. It just made me free. One evening, my sister asked me something I knew she'd been holding in for a long time. "Do you ever regret coming to the hospital that night?" she asked quietly. I thought about it honestly before answering. "No," I said, "but that doesn't mean I forgot what it cost me." She nodded, accepting that answer without trying to soften it. And in that moment, I knew we were finally speaking the same language. My parents never asked me to move back in, never tried to reclaim control. They knew better now, or maybe they were just afraid of losing me again. Either way, the dynamic had changed. I was no longer the child who stayed quiet to keep the peace. I was an adult who had survived being cut off and came back by choice, not obligation. Sometimes people ask me how I forgave them. The truth is, forgiveness wasn't a single moment. It wasn't signing a form or hearing an apology or watching someone cry. It was a series of decisions, some easy, some painful, about how much space the past was allowed to take up in my present. I didn't forgive to make them feel better. I forgave so I could stop carrying anger that no longer served me. And forgiveness didn't mean access. It didn't mean trust without proof. It meant peace with boundaries. Looking back now, I understand something I couldn't see back then. They cut me off because of a lie, but the lie didn't destroy me. What destroyed me, temporarily, was believing that being rejected meant I had no value. What saved me was learning that my worth didn't come from being chosen, believed, or needed. It came from knowing who I was, even when no one else did. That night in the ER, when I was their only hope, I wasn't proving anything to them. I was proving something to myself, that I could face the people who broke me, tell the truth, and walk away stronger than I ever was before.